Okay, well, now it's my pleasure to introduce somebody who's very familiar to a lot of you, and some people from around the world may not have a clue who she is, but you will definitely have your hearts warmed by her story. And it's about her helping as many people as she possibly can into a better life. So I'm going to stop my share and move over to Fatima. You're there. You're there.
Can you hear me now?
Lovely. Yes. Over to you, my darling.
Wow, that's impressive. Thank you also, Alexander, for the start of our session. Both Gina and I, actually, my name's Fatima Whitbread, by the way, for those that don't know who I am. I was a former international athlete that rose to stardom back in the 80s, and I had, 17 major medals in different championships, a world Olympic world record holder. It was a wonderful career, but really what's more to the point is who I really am. But before we get to that, I'd just like to say, Alex, I was very scared of falling asleep because both Gina and I did sleeping last night for the homeless in Lord's cricket ground, and we actually didn't sleep a wink. So I had to pinch myself several times so I didn't fall off to sleep there. Anyway, it's wonderful to be able to share this platform. And Gilly, it's nice to see you again and have the opportunity to talk with you all. And also Harold, I eternally will be grateful for the opportunity that you gave me, not just to talk about mental health, especially where our young children are concerned, but also the fact that I had the chance meeting Gina, who's now become the vice chair of Fatima's UK campaign. Fatima's UK campaign is all about bringing collaboration and partnerships together to improve the life outcomes for our young children and young people in the care system, which are the most vulnerable in society today. Now, why am I involved with the care system, you might ask? Well, abandoned as a baby, and some would say left to die, a neighbour heard a baby crying and hadn't seen anybody coming or going in a couple of days. So she called the police, who banged the door down, rescued the baby, which was myself. And then I spent the next several months in hospital recovering from malnutrition and nappy rash. Pleased to say I got over the nappy rash. Anyway, during that 7 months, I was then made a ward of court by Hackney Borough Council, which saw me then in the care system for the next 14 years of my life. Now, back in the 60s, the care system was quite different to what we see today. In many respects, it was more of institution. So we become institutionalized. There were 25 children in our first children's home, and nobody took the time to sit us down and explain anything to us as we were growing up. Our emotional needs were very seldom met. Back in the 60s, children should be seen and not heard. So we were sort of shuttled off and kept quiet. And I guess a lot of the younger children, like myself, were traumatized. When you don't have unconditional love, you get traumatized. Everybody needs to feel valued, understood, and their emotional needs met, especially as you're growing up. And I can remember playing in the front room of this big children's home, and it faced the car park. And anybody that came into the car park, I'd always say, "Is that my mummy coming to collect me?" Because most of the children spent their whole day thinking, why am I here? Where's my mummy? And, crying, emotionally deprived of love. And I was no different. Anyway, the first 5 years was spent in this children's home. As I say, I had no indication at all, any visits or anybody, came, anyone special in my life. And as I was growing up, I found it very difficult emotionally, like a lot of the children. I got trapped up here, worrying about what was going to happen to me, why I was here, had I been naughty, what had I done wrong. And then one morning, the house matron, everything was very functional, and it was run by a house matron and 16-year-old students that came from the local village, which was in Hertfordshire and in Ware. And I remember this particular morning, the house matron called to me. She said, "Fatima, be down tomorrow morning here, 9 o'clock in the morning. You're going to move to a new children's home. Your mother's coming to collect you, and you'll be moving where your half brother and sister are. And I thought, wow, that's a lot to take in. I didn't know I had a mummy, and I didn't know I had a half brother or sister. And this is my home. These children are my family. And why am I moving? And so you can imagine I didn't sleep very well. And when I sat down there at 9 o'clock in the morning, I could see this like opaque glass window frame by the door. And I saw this pink cerisi movement. And as the doorbell rang, the matron opened it. This very strong whiff of perfume came through. And a rather large burly lady stepped forward with black curly hair. And I could see when she was talking to the matron, she had a gold tooth here. But she never engaged with me or looked my way at all. And then standing slightly behind her was the social worker, who was sort of slim, linear lady with a mousy colour hair and a duffel coat. But she burst into the house and she sort of smiled and engaged with me. And I thought, oh, that must be my mummy. Because in a child's mind, they gravitate to people that are warm and they feel safe with. And that, to me, was my first, point of contact. And I didn't put the two things together, the big lady with the black curly hair, because I had huge black curly hair when I was a kid. But I just thought that this lovely young lady who was engaging and smiling at me must be my mummy. Anyway, we travelled down to the next place of residence in the children's home in Ockenden, which was about an hour and a half's journey. And the biological mum never spoke a word to me. And I can remember looking out the window thinking, why am I moving? And I just cried all the way. And then when we got to the second children's home, it was, again, it was like the house auntie came out and she met us. And she said, look, she said, run along into the back garden. She said, you'll meet your half brother and sister and all the other children that are playing in the garden. And of course, I was very concerned, having left the other children's home, that this was a complete strange place to me and these people I didn't know. So I was very frightened about it. But nevertheless, you can picture a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old trying to communicate, and the 4-year-old tugging on my clothes saying, oh, you must be my sister. And I'm looking down and I said, oh, yeah, must be your sister. And she sort of pulled me towards the climbing frame where all the children had gathered. And I remember starting to climb up the climbing frame, and then I felt this thud across my chest. And someone pulled me like this and said, you look after your sister, I cut your throat. And they were the first words that my biological mum spoke to me. Now, this isn't, obviously, children in the care system, they grow up feeling very traumatized. They've got trauma in their lives with not having that special mummy, or they've grown up with mental or physical abuse. In my case, it was both, and also sexual abuse at the hands of the mother's lover. And I just felt that my whole life was destined for doom and gloom until I met what I call my bright shining star, of which you've seen about the book. And that's what the book's all about, actually, my bright shining star. The book is about Auntie Ray, who came into my life when I came into the second children's home. I used to call her the tickle monster. Now, Auntie Ray, we all need good role models in our lives, especially children in the care system, keeps them on the right track. Auntie Ray, why I called her the tickle monster was because I used to hide under the bed covers in the morning. And if Auntie Ray came and woke us up, I didn't feel like my day had started unless she tickled me. So just as well she did, I'd probably still be hiding under the bed sheets somewhere. Anyway, Auntie Ray was an East End lady, a Cockney lady, the pearly kings and queens. You remember that era? Well, Auntie Ray was full of laughs and jokes, but she had lots of love, and us children just felt safe with Auntie Ray. We felt that we were heard and seen, and we were valued, and we meant something. And when Auntie Ray was on duty, it was an absolute pleasure. But when she wasn't, it was hell, because there were a lot of injustice that went on within the children's home, unfortunately. Now, I used to run up the staircase, and I'd look out the port window on the staircase, and I'd see, that's where Auntie Ray lives. So I'd watch her coming up and down the road. when she used to come on duty. And I got it at 10 years old. I went out and collected all these daffodils, picked them all, and I walked down to Auntie Ray's and I knocked on a door, hid the flowers behind my back. And when she opened the door, I said, "Will you be my mummy?" And she said to me, "Fats, come on, come round the back, let's talk about this." And I thought, I'm going to be in trouble for picking all the flowers from other people's gardens, you see. But she sat me down and I learned two really important lessons and two really important things that will always stay with me. The first was, she said to me, "Fats," she said, "I can't just be your mum." She said, "I've got to be mum to all those other children." She said, "But here's the thing. I can't always be there and you are." She said, "So why don't you be there, mum, when I'm not there?" And I started to think about this. And as a 10-year-old, that's quite a lot to take on, I suppose. But then again, I then realised, yes, it's quite a good thing. You can call out any injustice that were, which were many, which didn't make me very popular at that age. But nevertheless, I took my responsibilities quite seriously about being a mum. And of course, when young children were having nightmares during the night, I would comfort them. I'd read stories to them in bed. I played trampoline on the beds because there were several beds in the one room. We'd bounce on one to the other. And then we had pillow fights and just drawing little matchstick men on the steamed up windows in the morning. It was just what kids do, you know. So what that taught me was, in fulfilling those children's emotional needs, in giving, I received, because it came back tenfold. So I had a real purpose in my life to give that love to the children that they needed and be there for them. And in turn, I received a lot of love back. But the second thing, the most important thing, was it swiveled the lens. So what that did was I didn't feel trapped and victimized by my circumstances that surrounded me. I felt that I had a really important responsibility to those children in fulfilling their needs. And in doing so, it fulfilled mine. But it never, ever made me feel that I felt victimized by my circumstance, because I was doing a job of purpose. You know, and I thought this was a wonderful lesson that Auntie Ray sort of taught me as a young child growing up in the care system. And most kids that grow up in the care system all need that kind of guidance, to be fair. You know, they arrive in the care system through no fault of their own. They are traumatized. They're often let down. They have neglect and abandonment issues. And what they really need is good role models. So for me, I was one of the lucky ones. Now, we've got about 110,000 children in the care system as we speak. And we have a shortage of somewhat 10,000 foster carers. And that's another reason why the book is being written, because it's a platform. The platform is about trying to get the awareness about these young people in the care system so that we can ask mums and families to open their hearts and their homes, maybe to fostering some of these children. And also for the younger ones who go to school and with young children that live in residential care, maybe having more of an educational understanding for what these children are going through, because they don't realize. I mean, we try to find forever homes for these children, and it's very tough for them. The care system is brutal. It's broken in many respects, and hence why Fatima's UK campaign. And I was very fortunate when I bumped into Gina Gardner. Gina and I are like two halves that join. I'm very passionate because of the cause and my lived experience and my Olympic platform, which I use very much to engage with ministers, decision makers, stakeholders, of which the summit next year, April 23rd and 24th at the Guildhall in London. We've got 2 days, of which the first is all about shared good practice and knowledge, and having children at the forefront and the crux of that to share what they have to say, and what decision makers, when they make those decisions, they can hear those voices. But more importantly, also society, where the fact is that children have a lot of problems with their education, and only a third, or compared to conventional family children's, go on to further education. 27% of them by the age of 14 have mental health issues. and 27% of under 21-year-olds in our crime system have either come or crossed the path of the care system. Now, you might think, oh, yeah, well, that's because they've not had anybody to help them. And you'll be right. But the fact is, there are no real community events like there used to be. And we've got to get back to working collaboratively in partnerships to build happier, healthier lives, better communities, and a nicer kind of society. It's so important, that this day and age, both Gina and I heard this last night, and it's very true. Everyone's willing to blame society, but actually we are society. So it's up to us to start working collaboratively in partnerships to try and improve, the life outcomes, not just for our young, vulnerable children and young people, but our neighbours, our friends. We need to take that time and that opportunity to try and do what we can. It's tough out there. For any child, there's huge challenges, especially from the care system. When they become independent living at the age of 18, the government offer them £3,000, a point of contact only for twice a year, and then they fall off the care cliff, basically within 33% of them within the first 2 years end up homeless. That's a very frightening statistic, but it's even worse than that. It's gone up by 45% over the last 5 years. And we're talking about young people, 18-year-olds, where most conventional families, their younger ones don't leave home till about 26, 30 years of age. And let's face it, they've got the bank of mum and dad. They still have nans and granddads, aunts and uncles. Most conventional families' parents, they give unconditional love. They look after their children. They help them through their education. They guide them through their friendships. They help them into their careers, circumnavigate, and they're there throughout. But once these young children, the parental responsibility of the government comes to 18 and wipe their hands, they fall off the radar. And I always say, what do you want? A fence at the top of that cliff, or do you want the ambulance at the bottom? We have to start thinking and working more collaboratively together to try and solve these issues. And they're very doable. The problem we have is people are loathed to share the knowledge that they have or any other opportunities that might improve charity status or children's positions in aspirational events, the path of employment, which is what we're looking at currently with private companies bringing them aboard, because we know the government can only plug so many holes. They can't plug all of them. So we're looking obviously to society to ask them, what more can you do to help these young people or your community, your local charities, organisations to improve their life outcomes? And we always say again, like, the smaller charities for me are the frontline charities, not the headliners, the big charities. The big charities hoover up such a lot that the smaller charities are going under. And it's the smaller charities, all right, that run a day-to-day basis in the community and play a role to make that community work. Once you lose them, you're in very real danger of things collapsing very quickly. So my aim is, through the Fatima's UK campaign, is to bring together the collaboration where people work in silos. There's a lot of good stuff, but they all work in silos. Nobody collaborates and talks to one another. Nobody shares that good knowledge. So we're bringing harnessing the power of one voice is what it's called. Scotland, Wales, Ireland, England. So all the children's commissioners, children's ministers, all the stakeholders, decision makers, that we can actually make, a very real opportunity of pulling together and implementing change at government level. And also working on a program, Gina and I, with some very key people in bringing together a blueprint of a 5-year plan so we can get people to sign up to the policy and working together with the media to make sure that we hold them to account for what they say they're going to do and what they should be doing. Because often people like to give a lot of good lip service and really they don't do anything at all. But morally and ethically, and most of the time, they have that responsibility to doing something to help him. I mean, children are our future. We all know that. If we get back a little bit more to my story, I hope I've got time, Julie. Just tell me when I... Well, my story goes that, I mean, obviously, when I eventually get to the second children's home, and Auntie Ray being my bright shining star, the biological mum, I mean, I can remember she was supposed to be taking us back to live with her. I didn't want to go after that, to be fair, but the social services deemed it was important to try and bring the family together. And so I started to think, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. I'll get a family after all. But when she collected just children from the home, halfway down the road, she started jabbing me in the ribs with her elbow. And she reached for her handbag and put a coin in my hand, and she told me it's off because she didn't want me. And I kind of looked at her and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But laugh because I've got this half a crown, which was in the 60s, half a crown, which was quite a lot of money for a young kid. Or, you know, the fact that, you know, I sort of tried to convince myself this was a good idea to have a family, you know, after all this time. Anyway, when I got back to the children's home, the house auntie, she looked at me, she said, "What are you doing back here?" So I said, "Oh, my mum didn't want me." So she took the money. She said, "Go on in the back garden. You didn't want to go anyway." And that was the extent of how children's emotional needs were being met, which was amazing, really. But I guess, you know, from all my experiences, it made me very resilient and gave me a lot of inner strength. And I think these children in the care system have got what I call superpowers, because they have to face a lot of emotional and physical abuse and disappointment. And that builds their inner strength up, and it gives them that resistance, which most conventional families' kids never really have to face from such a young, early age. So I always say, when you look to train and skill up a young person, you're really working with somebody who's a very special, has superpowers, and would be a tremendous asset to any company. So we tried to talk to the general companies that we bring aboard to develop life skills for our kids and get them into jobs so that they can actually become independent living properly, and try and break that cycle of what's happened to them, because what we don't want is history repeating itself. I was lucky because I found the love of the Whitbreads through my sport. Sport was something that I loved. That was my sense of freedom when I was at school. Just to touch on it a bit, there are a lot of misconceptions about kids in the homes, that they're the naughty kids. We don't want children's homes around us, you know. But in actual fact, the kids, you know, they're lovely kids. If you get to know them, you know, they're just lost souls, really, that haven't got that special somebody in their lives to help nurture them. Unconditional love is an amazing thing, and trauma is equally amazing because it can damage, somebody very quickly. But I always say that trauma is something that we all experience. There's no hierarchy there. Just by being a human being, you don't have to be in the care system to experience trauma. But what we do have the responsibility for is, once we reach a certain age, is doing the healing work. So we have to accept our primary care years, whatever's happened or whatever's been handed down in generations gone by that's impacted us. When we reach a certain age, we'll have to then start to think, hold on a minute, I'm responsible for myself. I must learn to try and deal with past traumas, about future events that inform past trauma that triggers me, and a certain way of behavior then is either unacceptable or traumatizing again, doubly being traumatic for me, going back into the past. So I always say it's important that we work, you know, on our trauma, each and every one of us, whether we're in the care system or not. Now, sport was where I found myself. You know, that's my meditational area of relaxation. I love art. I love doing journaling. I love all that. I love puzzles. I like cooking. But sport, when I was a young kid, that was my saviour. And I always found that sport and technology and arts programs, which we give our young children today, is a wonderful opportunity to learn about life skills. And that's what happened for me. I learned about time management, how to deal with myself, how to deal as a team captain, how to look after my team, organise events. I knew the ones that needed a kick in the rear, the ones that needed a pat on the back or a hug or a stiff talking to. These are the things that you learn when you become part of, some event or, a club. And to get these young people engaging with others is all about self-growth. And that's what's important, because we can't stay that child, and then we've all got that child within us, but at some stage we all want to be responsible and live an independent life and then eventually have a family of our own. So there's big responsibilities. So first, look after yourself so that you can look after others. My sport was what led me to meet the Whitbreads, the love of the Whitbreads. And at school I was, as I said, involved with sport, and this particular netball match that we had was a league match, and it was, if we were to win this league match, we would also win a medal. It might be my first medal. And I said to Auntie Ray, she was the mum I always wanted. And I said, well, look, I said, if we win, I said, to get a medal, Auntie, I said, I'd like you to have it. So Auntie Ray said, now you listen here, young lady. She said, you haven't won that medal yet. She said, so you just concentrate on what you're doing, enjoy what you do. And I remember when I was competing much years later in the Olympic Games, that Auntie Ray's words rang through my ear. Never ever go into the arena thinking about winning a medal, because somebody might perform much better, and then you start thinking, oh, am I going to get that medal? Or, because there are two games that go on in an event. There's the event itself, and then there's a psychological game. So as long as you keep that tunnel vision and you purposefully concentrate on what you're doing, and you've done the preparation work, and you give of your best, what will be, will be. And that's how I used to go into my events. But this match was going 11-11, 12-11, 12 all. And I was sort of motivating my team. My voice was rising above all everyone else's. And the whistle went, and the umpire said, young lady, keep that noise down, otherwise you'll be off. And I kind of like quietened down a bit, and it was 12 all, 13-12, 13 all, and I was getting involved again. And now, don't get me wrong, back in then, obviously, today you would call us motivators. Back then they used to call us a pain in the ass. So the whistle went again, and the umpire said, I've told you once, young lady, if I've got to tell you again, you'll be off. And so, of course, as I turned and muttered under my voice, their team captain, Donna, said, Fats, don't. She's very strict. She'll send you off. Well, anyway, at the end of the game, we won. Yay, Auntie Ray got her medal. And then it was the end of the netball season and the start of the athletic season. And I said to my friend Amber, who lived in the care home around the corner, and I said to her, Alma, it's the athletic season. Let's go to the local athletic club. And we walked about 5 miles, and we must have pocketed the bus money on done something silly like Woodbine cigarettes, some silly things that kids used to do. And when we got to the track, Alma saw the sprinters and off she went. And I saw this tall, good-looking blonde guy that looked like Robert Redford. I thought, well, he looks nice. I'll go over there. And when I walked over to the runway, the javelin was on the ground, and I went to pick it up, and he said, you can't do that. So I said, why not? So the shot put coach behind said, oh, young lady, you have to wait in the stand. The javelin coach will be over in a while, and then we'll see about you throwing. So I'm sitting in the stand, like all children in the care system, a little bit feisty because you're used to fighting for your own rights. So I'm sort of toe tapping with my arms folded. And then he said, oh, here comes the javelin coach. And this Mini pulled up in the car park. And as I'm looking, this figure comes across the infield. I did a double take. It's that same woman off the netball court. What are the chances? The umpire. Well, as she walked over to the stand, Jack went to introduce us, and she said, "Oh, I know who you are." She said, "You're Fatima." She said, "Well, let me tell you, young lady, any of that cheek you showed on the netball court, there'll be no throwing any javelins here." So I put my hands in prayer, and I said, "I promise you I'll behave." Anyway, as the weeks went by, she said, "Well," she said, "you've got a bit of talent. Why don't you ask mum and dad to come up and we can talk about javelin and some boots, and we'll get you into a competition program." And I sort of just nodded my head. And with that, she said, "Jack," she said, "has Fatima got a hearing problem?" "No." "Why is that?" Jack said, "Well, every time I talk about mum and dad." "Oh," he said, "don't you know she's one of the kids from the children's home?" And of course, with that, the following week, Mrs. Whitbread came up. She bought a pair of boots. She said, "These are 2 sizes too big for you." She said, "But stuff them with paper." She said, "And they're yours. And here's a javelin. I had a young girl that's retired. Would you like them?" I said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." You know, I mean, because again, you know, kids, everything you got in the children's home, you were lucky if you got anything from the village. It was usually broken, or, you know, it was communal use. You could never really get attached to it. But this was something special. So I wanted to get back home to the children's home, because in the summer season, we had German students that would come and look after us kids, and the house parents would go off duty for a while. And I said to Am, "I want to get back." I said, "Let's get the bus today." Now, if you picture this standing at the bus stop, it wouldn't happen today. The bus driver pulls up, the door's open, and he's going to me. And I went, pointing the javelin at him. He said, "Go on, get on the bus," he said, "and behave." Well, anyway, when I got back to the children's home, I said, "Ingrid, come out in the garden. Let me show you how I throw this javelin." So, of course, it took me a couple of throws to get it to the end of the garden, and it stuck in the vegetable patch. So I discarded the potato off the end, and I moved forward, and I said, "Now move out of the way. I'm going to give it a really big throw this time." And I did, and it went smash through the French windows. Well, of course, Ingrid's standing there with her head in her hands. "Oh, you're going to be in trouble." So I said, "Yeah, I'm always in trouble." And I laughed. I said, "I'll tell you what. Stick it with sellotape. They won't know." "Don't be silly," she said. Well, of course they knew. When they came back, I had a month's ban, and that meant no after-school activities at school, and it meant also I couldn't stop in to see Auntie Ray, who was my one person that would keep me on the right side of being, you know, safe and happy. And so, within a few weeks, playing in the back garden and not being able to do any sport, I got a message back from one of the girls in the opposite team. "Mrs. Whitbread thinks you've bunked off. You've sold the boots and the javelin, and you know, you're not interested anymore." So I thought, "Oh, I can't have that." So I got up at 2 o'clock one morning. It was roughly about that time. I went downstairs to the front room. They had a French bureau, and I took out, in my ignorance and air, my envelope, and I wrote on it. I said, "Dear Mrs. Whitbread, I'm sorry I can't come to the track. Only I smashed the French windows, and I got a month's ban. But one day I want to be the best javelin thrower in the world." And I stuck it down, and I put Mrs. Whitbread, St. Chad School. And of course, the next morning I posted it on the way to school. And of course I waited and nothing. So I thought she couldn't have got it, because I didn't have an address. It was just Mrs. Whitbread, St. Chad School. And of course, the next minute I knew the phone was ringing when I was in the back garden. So I pressed my ear to the glass window, and I could hear the house auntie saying, "Oh," she said, no, she can't come. She's been naughty. She smashed the windows, and uncle won't let her come." Mrs. Whitbread must have been very persistent, because I was back at the track within a week. And then she invited me to see the family. And I met Mr. Whitbread and their sons, Greg, who was 4, Kirk, who was 2, and I was naturally good with kids because of being in the children's home. And then after the tea, Mrs. Whitbread said, "How about come and spend a couple of weeks with us while you're on your summer holidays?" And I was kind of like, "Oh, I've got to look after the children." But Auntie Ray said, "Fats, you've always wanted to know what it's like to be within a family, a network." She said, "Now you go along and have a good time." And of course, it was lovely. It, you know, like all families, had ups and downs. So that was, you know, nice. And at the end of it, Greg, the little 4-year-old, said to his mum, "Mum, do we have to take Fatima back to the shop?" And it was quite funny, really. And so anyway, she said to me as she was dropping me back to the children's home, "Would you like to come and live with us and be a Whitbread?" And I sort of, like all children in the care system, I daren't say yes because I didn't want to be disappointed if it didn't work out. And, you know, constantly these children in the care system are always being moved from place to place, and they get disappointed quite often. But Auntie Ray, true as Auntie Ray did, she said, you've always wanted, she said, to have a family. She said, here's your chance. I can't give you that. She said, but the Whitbreads can. And she said, and that gave me permission to let go and, you know, spend my time, my rest of my days with the Whitbreads as a young teenager.
Fatima,
yeah,
I really hate to cut you off in your prime.
that's me done now.
Yeah, you've spoken beautifully, and it's just touched all our hearts. You can have a look at the chat space in a moment. The people that are so immersed in the conversation, and they're hating me at this moment for cutting you short.
Oh no, my apologies. So just
no, it's fine. It was so interesting. If anybody wants to hear more, we did have the full story on the podcast. So Alan, if you can find the podcast, it is out there. I checked this morning.
That's what really brought me to where I am with regard to my ministry, has been in trying to improve the life outcomes for children in the care system. And Gina and I are the only two that work within it. And I must say, you know, I certainly wouldn't have been able to have achieved it without Gina. We're both, you know, I'm eternally grateful. And thank you, Harold, for helping make that happen.
And what we want to do now is send people off to breakout rooms to discuss what you've been sharing, maybe around a question. I don't know if you've got a particular question you'd like to ask them, but what struck me as you were talking, you said, do people want a fence at the top of the cliff or an ambulance at the bottom? Mm-hmm. That was phenomenal. So maybe in our groups, just for 10 minutes instead of 20, like we would normally do, what more could be done to help? And possibly, as an afterthought, what could you do? What could every individual in this meeting, or potentially one small action that you could do? And then we'll come back and we'll have a little share and see where we've come. And then if you've got any questions for Fatima then, and anything else that she wants to add to what she's saying, we'll have a few minutes at the end. Okay.